What you learned about someone on the first date that you didn't go on the second one.
It all started on an app. You know the kind, those dating apps where you scroll for hours, half laughing at the weird profiles, then get surprised when someone decent actually messages you. His name was Ryan, and we started chatting a couple of weeks before we finally agreed to meet up. He was articulate, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in me. Every message felt like it was crafted with care, none of the lazy, one-sentence answers I'd gotten from other guys. Ryan actually asked about my day, about the books I liked, my thoughts on travel. But it wasn't just the questions, it was the way he answered. He shared intimate details too. About how his parents' divorce had shaped the way he viewed relationships, about his love for jazz, his favorite late-night snack. I laughed when he said, tacos and ice cream, but it felt endearing. We had hours-long conversations, sometimes late into the night. By the time we decided to meet, I felt like I knew him better than anyone else. I spent days thinking about what to wear. He had this effortless charm in his texts, so I wanted to match that energy, look cute, but not try too hard. When we finally settled on a coffee shop in the middle of the city, I was filled with this strange mixture of excitement and nerves. I tried not to overthink it, but it felt like the stakes were so high. When I walked in, I saw him right away. Ryan was exactly how he looked in his pictures, tall, dark hair, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans. He smiled when he saw me, and I swear my heart skipped a beat. It was this small, genuine smile that made my nerves feel instantly at ease. He stood up to hug me, and that was when I thought, okay, this could be the beginning of something great. We sat down, and the conversation flowed at first. We talked about the things we'd texted about, his jazz collection, my obsession with European travel, how both of us wanted to explore more of the world. But the conversation started to shift. It felt like he was giving shorter answers, almost like he was distracted. I pushed it aside at first, thinking maybe he was just nervous like me. But then came the turn. He asked me about my weekend plans, and I mentioned I was going to a friend's birthday party. He didn't seem all that interested, which was odd considering how much we had in common. His eyes kept wandering to the barista, the coffee machine, the window outside. Every now and then, he'd check his phone, something I had never seen him do during our texts. It wasn't long before I realized that something felt off. The connection we had online didn't translate in real life. It wasn't just that he was distracted, it was the way his responses had changed. The guy I'd talked to for hours on end didn't seem to exist in front of me. Then, as we were finishing our coffee, he asked me something that I wasn't prepared for. "You want to come back to my place?" He said it casually, almost too casually. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. The words coming from his mouth didn't match the sweet, thoughtful guy I had imagined him to be. I had been so sure that we'd connect on a deeper level, that this would be the start of something real. But there was no depth here. He wasn't interested in my ideas or my dreams. He was interested in something far more physical. I tried to play it off. I don't think that's a good idea." Ryan smirked. "No worries. Just thought I'd ask. I'm not trying to rush you." But his eyes told a different story. He didn't seem embarrassed, just almost disappointed. Like he thought he had it all figured out. Online chemistry meant instant physical chemistry. That's when the reality hit me like a brick. All those sweet, thoughtful messages, all those late-night talks, they were just a smokescreen for what he really wanted. I stood up quickly, excusing myself. As I walked away, I could feel his gaze on me, but I didn't turn around. I could barely breathe on my way home. My heart was pounding, not in the excited way it had been when I'd first seen Ryan, but in a tight, panicked way. I should have felt relieved to be out of that situation, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of confusion. My mind kept replaying the conversation over and over, trying to figure out what had gone wrong, where I'd missed the signs. I had been so excited to meet him in person, to see if the person I had spent hours talking to could be the same in real life. And I was so sure of it. He had been so open with me, so genuine in his texts. It felt like he was really listening, engaging. But now, in hindsight, I realized those long messages had never really been about me. They were about him, about keeping me hooked. I kept thinking about the way he'd asked me to come back to his place. It was casual, like it was the next logical step. The way he didn't even flinch when I said no, it was like he was used to that response. Not surprised, not disappointed, just unfazed. I realized then that it wasn't about making a real connection with me, it was just about getting me to come over. Once I got home, I sat in my living room in a daze, staring at my phone. I knew I should text him back, thank him for the coffee, and be polite, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wasn't angry, but I felt so foolish. How could I have been so blind? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that everything he had said was just an act. The jokes about his dog, the conversations about our childhoods, they were just tools to keep me interested, to keep me texting him. He wasn't interested in who I was. He wasn't interested in building something real. He never texted me again, and that hurt more than I thought it would. I tried to shake it off, but the lingering doubt kept eating at me. What was wrong with me? Why had I believed in him so much? I couldn't help but feel embarrassed, like I had been played by someone I thought was worth my time. But it also made me rethink how I approached dating in general. I had been so desperate to find someone who could make me feel important, someone who could understand me, that I'd missed the red flags that were right in front of my face. The constant check-ins, the casual tone, the lack of real interest in my thoughts, they were all signs, and I had ignored them. Looking back, I learned a tough lesson that day, that chemistry in text doesn't always translate into chemistry in person. What you get on the first date is often closer to the truth than what you build in the weeks before it. And sometimes, all you can do is take it for what it is and move on.
It had been weeks of texting, and I had genuinely started to like Lucas. We met on Bumble, and our first messages felt like a breath of fresh air. Unlike the other guys I had talked to, he actually engaged with what I said. He wasn't just throwing out compliments or saying generic things like, "You're cute," or "What's up?" Lucas seemed to really pay attention to my responses, asking thoughtful questions and sharing things about himself that made him feel real. We talked about music, books, travel plans, even our favorite comfort foods. He sent me pictures of his hiking trips, some old photos from college, and we bonded over how much we both loved cooking. I'd sent him a picture of a homemade lasagna I made, and he jokingly said he wanted to be invited over. There was this easy flow between us, like we had known each other for years. It was comfortable, almost too comfortable. The more we talked, the more I felt like I could really connect with him. We had similar senses of humor, similar interests. He would even send me songs he thought I'd like, little things that made me feel like he was putting in effort. And I couldn't deny it. I started to develop a crush. He wasn't the type of guy I normally went for, but there was something about how easy he made me feel, how I could tell him anything without judgment. So when he asked me to meet up, I was thrilled. We agreed on dinner at a local Italian place, and I spent way too long picking out what I was going to wear. I wanted everything to be perfect. What if this was the beginning of something? What if he was the one? I imagined how nice it would be to talk in person, to finally connect face-to-face the way we had through our texts. When I walked into the restaurant, I saw him right away. Lucas was exactly how he looked in his pictures, tall, slightly scruffy, with that relaxed vibe that made him look like he didn't care about impressing anyone. He waved as I walked over to him, and I smiled, feeling a little giddy inside. We sat down and immediately started chatting. But there was something different. Something I couldn't quite place. He was a little quieter than I expected, and at first I thought maybe he was just shy in person. But as the evening went on, it became clear that his online persona, the one that made me laugh so much, the one who seemed like he was really engaged, didn't match the guy sitting across from me. His answers were short. He kept glancing at his phone, scrolling through it between bites of his food. I tried to carry the conversation, asking him about his favorite vacation spots, what his childhood was like, but every time I threw out a question, he would answer with a simple, "Yeah, that was cool," or "I don't really remember much." It was like he had no interest in anything beyond the surface. We ordered a bottle of wine, and I tried to keep the conversation going, but it felt like pulling teeth. I found myself talking more than him, making little jokes, trying to fill the silence. I could feel myself getting frustrated, but I didn't want to be rude. After all, he seemed nice in our messages. I told myself it was just the nerves or maybe the environment. But then came the moment that really threw me off. When the check came, Lucas glanced at it and then looked at me. "So, you wanna split it?" I stared at him, thinking I'd misheard him. Split it? He'd never mentioned anything about splitting bills before. In fact, he'd always seemed like he was making an effort to be a gentleman in our messages. "Oh, you want to split it?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was sinking. "Yeah," he said, his eyes drifting back to his phone. "You know, I think it's fair." At that moment, I realized that all the thoughtful gestures and engaging conversations we'd had through text had been, well, just that, text. They were nothing more than a screen version of him, a carefully curated personality. In real life, he was distant, uninterested, and didn't have the decency to at least cover the bill. I felt this deep, awkward silence in the pit of my stomach. The guy I thought had potential, who had seemed like someone I could really connect with, had turned out to be just another guy who didn't understand the basic decency of a date. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to call him out for being so cheap and rude, but that's exactly what it felt like, cheap and rude. After all the great conversations we'd had, the way he'd made me feel special online, and now here he was, practically looking for an excuse to avoid any responsibility. It wasn't even about the money, it was the principle. He'd never once suggested splitting the bill during our conversations, never once mentioned how he thought things should work out on a date. I reached into my bag, pulling out my wallet, my fingers trembling a bit. I wasn't angry, but I was definitely hurt. Hurt by the fact that I had misread him so completely, that I'd fallen for this illusion of connection that we'd built up in our texts. I handed over my share, trying to keep my face neutral. Lucas didn't seem to notice. He just shrugged as if it was the most normal thing in the world. The conversation died down, and there was this thick, uncomfortable silence hanging over us. I could barely make eye contact with him, my mind racing with disappointment. What had happened to the funny, engaging guy I'd spent hours talking to? Where had the chemistry gone? The waiter came over, took our payments, and I could feel the awkwardness growing in the space between us. I didn't even know what to say at this point. Should I pretend like everything was fine and keep going along with this weird, boring date? Or should I just call it a night? "So, what are you up to after this?" Lucas asked, his voice flat. I didn't know how to answer him. The evening had completely deflated me. I was no longer interested in doing anything else with him. "I think I'm gonna head home," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice was tight. "Oh, okay," Lucas said, clearly not bothered. "Well, maybe we can do this again sometime." The words hung in the air, but I could already tell they meant nothing. He wasn't trying to salvage anything. He was just going through the motions. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and without saying much more, I turned to leave. Lucas just nodded, as if we had shared a pleasant evening instead of a terrible one. On my way out of the restaurant, I could feel the sting of it all. My mind kept replaying the whole date, the small talk, the lack of effort, the way he acted like splitting the bill was the most normal thing in the world. And I realized I had been so naive to think that what we had online could translate to real life. It was a gut punch to realize that all that connection I thought we had was built on thin air. I didn't get anything I thought I would from the date. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the complete disconnection between the person I had fallen for online and the person who sat across from me at the table. I had learned the hard way that no matter how well you think you know someone through text, you can never truly know them until you meet them in person. And sometimes that person you've been talking to might not be the person you expect at all. When I got home, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. I knew I should have texted him something like, "Thanks for dinner," but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I deleted his number and promised myself I wouldn't fall for the illusion again.
I met Emily on Tinder, and from the very beginning, she seemed perfect. Her profile was filled with well-lit photos where she looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine. She had that effortless beauty that made me think, wow, this girl must be out of my league. Her photos were always well curated. She was smiling in every single one, posing with friends at bars, hiking on a mountain trail, or at some fancy dinner looking effortlessly chic. She had a genuine smile, the kind that made me think she was always happy and put together. Our conversations, too, were great. She was witty, sharp, and seemed so down to earth. We had a lot of the same interests: music, food, movies. It felt easy to talk to her, like we'd known each other for years. I liked that she seemed confident, funny, and interested in getting to know me. Every time I asked about her day, she'd send me a quick picture, usually of something she was doing with her friends or a great meal she was eating. It felt like she was living this perfect, Instagram-worthy life, and I was lucky to be part of it, even if just for a few messages here and there. When we decided to meet up, I was beyond excited. We agreed on a casual coffee shop downtown, a neutral place where we could talk and get to know each other better. I spent way too much time getting ready, picking out an outfit, checking my reflection in the mirror one last time. I kept telling myself that I wasn't nervous, but deep down I was. What if I didn't live up to her expectations? What if she wasn't as into me in person as she had been over text? When I arrived at the coffee shop, I looked around but couldn't see her anywhere. I texted her to let her know I was there, and within a few minutes she walked in. At first, I didn't recognize her. There was something off about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on. She was wearing baggy clothes, way different than the trendy outfits she wore in her pictures. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she didn't seem as put together as her photos suggested. I didn't want to be judgmental. After all, we all have days when we just want to be comfortable, right? But something about her appearance felt jarring to me, and it left me wondering if I was overthinking it. "Hey, it's me, Emily," she said with a smile. She looked different than I expected, but I smiled back and stood up to greet her. The moment we sat down, the awkwardness hit me. We started talking, and I could tell right away that there was something missing. She wasn't as energetic as she had seemed in her texts. She wasn't asking questions about my day or even engaging in the conversation much. It felt like she was distracted, like her mind wasn't really there. But I kept telling myself that maybe she was just nervous, like I was. Everyone has their off days, right? I tried to focus on the conversation, but her vibe was different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the conversation dragged on, I couldn't ignore the small details that stood out in person, things I hadn't expected. First, there was the smell of cigarette smoke lingering on her clothes, which she hadn't mentioned in her profile or in any of our chats. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was a bit of a turnoff considering how clean and fresh her photos always made her seem. But it wasn't just the little things, it was the bigger things that started to stand out. For one, her teeth weren't as white as they looked in her pictures. In fact, they were yellowish and slightly crooked, which wasn't a big deal, but it was surprising. The smile that had seemed so perfect online didn't quite match the reality. I know it's a minor thing, but after weeks of seeing flawless photos, it caught me off guard. I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Then there was her hands. In the photos she'd sent me, they looked delicate and well-kept. But in person, her hands were unshaved with visible dark hair on her arms. I know it sounds petty, but in her pictures she always seemed so polished, nails perfectly manicured, skin soft and smooth. But here, they were rougher, unpolished. I also noticed that her makeup wasn't as fresh as it seemed in the pictures. It looked like she had applied it in a hurry, and by the time we sat down, it was starting to wear off. There was no mascara to make her eyes pop, no contouring to accentuate her features. It was as if the person sitting in front of me was a far cry from the one I had imagined based on the perfect online profile. To top it all off, she seemed completely uninterested in being there. Her answers were short, and whenever I tried to keep the conversation going, she would give me these vague, disinterested responses. The energy I had felt online, where she had been so engaged and excited, was completely gone. I tried to suggest a few things we could do after coffee, like grabbing lunch or walking around downtown, but she just shrugged it off. "So, are you gonna finish that?" she asked, pointing to my half-empty cup of coffee. It felt like she didn't even care about what I was saying. She was clearly distracted, scrolling through her phone between my sentences. I couldn't help but feel like I was just wasting my time. The girl I had spent hours texting with had turned into someone who didn't care enough to even put any effort into the date. I felt this weight in my chest, this crushing disappointment that I couldn't shake. I had built up this image of her, this ideal version of who she was, based on her perfect photos and our fun chats. But here I was, sitting across from a person who didn't even seem to care about me. It was like the magic I had imagined between us had been shattered in an instant. I paid the bill without hesitation, feeling a mix of frustration and embarrassment. I didn't even know what to say to her. I didn't feel like there was anything to salvage. I told her I had to leave, and she just nodded, not even looking up from her phone. As I walked out of the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about how different everything was. I had learned a hard lesson about online dating that day. No matter how perfect someone may seem through their pictures or messages, you can never really know who they are until you meet them in person. And more importantly, sometimes people are only as interesting and as perfect as the image they create online. In reality, the connection just doesn't always translate. That was the last time I ever contacted her. It wasn't about her appearance, it was about the fact that she wasn't the person she made herself out to be. The online version of her was nothing more than a curated image, and the real version was someone I had no interest in getting to know further.